For decades, the relationship between the United States and Venezuela has been a slow-burning crisis. What looked like diplomacy and sanctions for years has recently escalated into direct military confrontation, a mixture of drug war claims, geopolitical rivalry, and decades of mutual distrust. In short, Washington accuses Caracas of running or sheltering transnational drug networks and hostile actors. Caracas says the US is aiming to topple its government and seize its resources. That clash of narratives is the backdrop for everything that followed. The immediate causes are recent and concrete. The US launched a campaign of strikes on suspected drug smuggling vessels operating from Venezuelan waters, and in late 2025 began designating key Venezuelan networks, including the so-called Cartel de los Soles, as terrorist organizations. US officials have also signaled a stepped-up phase of operations and moved naval and air power into the Caribbean. Caracas responded with warnings, threats to retaliate, and renewed alliances with countries like Russia and Iran, turning what began as targeted strikes into a much wider security confrontation. But this conflict didn't appear from nowhere. There's a long history: US sanctions on Venezuelan leaders and oil, allegations of covert interference going back to the Chavez era, and multiple attempts by Washington to isolate the Maduro government diplomatically. Those precedents shaped both countries' expectations. The US sees hard power and economic pressure as tools to change regime behavior. Venezuela sees resistance and external support as survival strategies. That history helps explain why each side escalated rather than stepped back. The situation is complicated by several layers. First, legal and moral questions. Lethal strikes far from formal. Declarations of war raise flags about international law and accountability. Second, regional politics. Latin American neighbors worry about spillover, refugee flows, and disruption to trade. Third, great power competition. Russia, China, and Iran have ties to Venezuela, meaning an escalation could prompt broader diplomatic or material support for Caracas. Fourth, domestic drivers, US politics, Venezuelan regime survival instincts, and narco-trafficking profits all push decision-makers toward irreversible steps. Each layer multiplies the risk of miscalculation, unless a dramatic event forces a sudden change. For viewers, watch for three signals that matter most: formal designations and legal steps in the US, any movement of multinational forces or bases into the region, and credible third-party mediation offers. Those will tell you whether the crisis is cooling or about to widen. In the end, this is not just a bilateral quarrel over drugs or oil. It's a collision of strategic priorities, messy domestic politics, and a long history of intervention and resistance. That's why, for the people who will suffer most,